left in that last little bit about let the sinners be consumed from the earth, because the Psalms often, even the really lovely and beautiful ones, almost always have a little jab at the end. And let my enemies be crushed. God, you're so amazing. Everything is beautiful. Destroy my enemies. Amen. You know, like sneak it in there right at the end. Right? So I just thought that was so. How did you feel listening to Psalm 104, these excerpts? Hearing and these images. How did it feel? Just like a feeling word. Peaceful? Thrilling. One more. Taken care of. Did you see these things that were being described? Like the beams that uphold the sky, could you kind of imagine that image? Or the fire and flames are your ministers, and what that might mean? How many of you know what a hyrax is? It said coney on this description, but I actually looked it up. A coney is another word for what? Rabbit. But a hyrax is actually this super strange animal that has suction cup feet, but it's a mammal. So imagine if you took a marmot and a raccoon and a brown bear and mixed them together and made them the size of a cat. Exactly. With suction feet. It has like hooves. Now here's the trick, is it's actually more closely related to an elephant and a rhinoceros and a manatee than it is any other animal in the area, like any other rodent, right? How many of you have ever seen a picture, ever even heard of a hyrax before? But how many of you have a pretty good picture of it in your head now, right? Think about that. That's part of what's amazing about being human. Psalm 104 doesn't ever say anywhere in it to remember, but clearly it intends for us to remember these things because we can't see all of them at once. And it even invites us to imagine these things, some of these things that cannot be seen. But in order to engage Psalm 104, it assumes that we're both going to have some experience that we bring to bear, some memory that we bring to bear, but also a great deal of creativity and imagination that we're going to bring to bear. And this is what I love about Psalm 104, is because it also reminds us about both our creatureliness, our having experience. Every creature has experience of reality, of God's reality. And every creature on some level has memory, remembers these experiences and carries them forward as part of their living and their practice. But I find that what makes humans really distinct from other creatures on the earth, the place where I locate the imago Dei, the image of God that was implanted in humanity when they were created, as told in the book of Genesis, is our creativity. Because what is God if not generative? What is God if not creative? What is God if not a connector and a realigner and a reimaginer and a let's make new things constantly? And does that not feel like what humanity is and has been doing for centuries, for millennia? Combining and recombining, creating and recreating. The question is, what's gonna guide that, right? Now you remember that we talked about last week, we were reading from the book of Deuteronomy. And in the book of Deuteronomy, it's this kind of final sermon series that Moses is giving to the people before they enter the promised land. And he's a little anxious that they're gonna forget all the lessons they learned in the wilderness. He's a little anxious they're gonna forget about the water. He's anxious they're gonna forget about the bread. He's anxious they're going to forget that they've had this God taking care of them all this time. He's not anxious about them having experiences of God's creation. He's not anxious about them remembering that they are in need. He's anxious about them remembering that their experiences are founded on God's grace and remembering the care that they've received. Right? He's a little worried about their creativity. Right? Because what tends to happen happened when Moses goes up the mountain and leaves the people alone to their own devices and creativity?
They built the idols.
They built some idols, right? There's a lot of warnings in the books of Moses about idols. They're very artistic. Humans are very creative. He's concerned about what are we going to point our creativity at. That's one of his primary concerns. So he calls on them to remember. I'm just going to read a couple passages out of Deuteronomy. This is Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 9. But take care and watch yourselves closely, so as neither to forget the things that your eyes have seen, nor let them slip from your mind all the days of your life. Make them known to your children and your children's children. And I'll skip forward to chapter 8, starting at verse 11. Take care that you do not forget the Lord your God by failing to keep God's commandments, ordinances, and statutes that I am commanding you today. When you have eaten your fill and have built fine houses and live in them, and when your herds and flocks have multiplied, and your silver and gold is multiplied, and all that you have is multiplied, then do not exalt yourself, forgetting the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery, who led you through the terrible wilderness, the arid wasteland with poisonous snakes, scorpions. God made the water flow for you from flint rock. God fed you in the wilderness with manna that your ancestors did not know, to humble you and remind you in the end to do good. Do not say to yourself, my power and the might of my own hand have gotten me this wealth, but remember the Lord your God, for it is God who gives you the power to get wealth, so that God may confirm the covenant that was sworn to your ancestors, as is being done today. Moses is very intent that we remember. Moses is very intent that we call into being. So in English, the word remember, actually, its root is Latin, and it basically means to be mindful again. I like remember in terms of like members and putting members back together, and that's fun, but that's not actually etymologically correct. But I like pretending that is anyway, because it's more interesting. But it means to be mindful again. But the Hebrew word is zakar. And the Hebrew word is actually much more interesting, because the Hebrew word means to bring the past to bear on the present, which is different than to be mindful. See, in Hebrew theology and thinking, we remember in order to reenact, to make alive the history again. People of Israel are told to remember that you were slaves in Egypt many generations after they have entered the promised land. Many, many, many generations after these things have happened, they're told to remember it as if it is happening to them now, because it should be brought to bear on the present moment. So what is it now, today, that we are going to call to bear on our creativity, to guide it, to orient it, to, dare I say, limit it? Maybe focus. Because we're seeing all this anxiety about artificial intelligence as an example. And what's the primary anxiety? Is where do we limit? How do we focus? What will this be brought to bear on, and where are we going to put boundaries around it? And this is just one example of so many things that have happened in human creativity, where we created things for the sake of creating them because we could, and how cool is it that we can? Just think about where hip surgery is today from where it was 20 years ago, right? That's something with real purpose, real intention. Think about warfare as it is today from where it was 20, 50, 100 years ago. It's also something that has changed with great purpose and intention. But is that the purpose and intention that we want to be calling into a globalized world? Think about fossil fuel production as it is today. There are so many places where we can look at human creativity and say, man, we have done an incredible job of focusing, harnessing power. And we are so much more powerful today than we've ever been before in human history. And we are only going to get more and more and more powerful. Well, of course. course, right? Power aggregates itself, right? But as a creature, have you thought about how powerful you are as a creature? How much your intention, your desire, your energy, your focus can shape the world around you? Like you, different than almost any other creature in the world, you can change so many people's lives just with how you are. Your language is a technology that has abundant power. How often do I forget the power of my language? How often do I forget to remember why God gave us language in the first place? Another story from Genesis, the Tower of Babel. The humans were all speaking one language and building a tower up to the heavens that they might claim the place of God. And God came and destroyed the tower and scattered the people, causing them to speak all kinds of different other languages. Why? It doesn't say. But I'll tell you that I think it's because then they had to humble themselves to learn to work to be in relationship. They couldn't assume relationship. How often do I assume relationship and therefore assume power, as opposed to intending relationship, working to connect? Again, remembering that others different from me are part of me. And how do I get that knowledge back? Just like us being part of the natural world. So what's Moses do? He's there at the edge of the promised land. He's worried about human creativity. He's worried about the possibility. He's worried about forgetting. And so he mandates that they create all of these rituals in their corporate life to remember. Because forgetting is so easy. Forgetting is so common, right? We get caught in the moment, and here we are with the next challenge and the new thing and the novel. And it's so easy for us to get. Remembering is the work. And so he actually builds in all these rituals, and throughout Deuteronomy, there's all these commands. Teach your children the things that you've learned from the wilderness. Proclaim your faith. Observe the Sabbath. Give thanks for all your blessings. Confess your sins. Celebrate the Passover. Tithe. Act with justice to your employees, to immigrants and orphans, to the poor. All of these are called as acts of remembering. Again, bringing the past to bear on the present, to orient, focus, guide, and limit our behaviors. There's an anthropologist named Clifford Geertz, and he studied ritual in various human communities. And what I found really interesting about ritual, as he studied it more and more, is he found that ritual was always a remembrance and a recreation at the same time. It was always both, well, this is what our parents and grandparents did, this is what we did when we were children, and now we're doing it again, and yet it was always different every time it was done. Because every time a ritual is done, there's a decision by that community, what's important and why is it important? What are we remembering and why are we remembering it? And the situation that we're in every time we engage in ritual is a little bit different. Think about every time you've ever come for communion, and your needs were different. Sometimes it was just ordinary bread and juice. And sometimes it was the power of God in your life and body. Sometimes it was a breakdown, and sometimes it was a breakthrough. Sometimes it was a holy moment, and sometimes it was an ordinary moment. Same ritual. Maybe different place, different minister, different words. But there's both that sense that we're carrying from the past and we're creating in the moment, but oriented around some set of values, some purpose, some memory of God at work in our lives. Zakar means to bring the past to bear on the present. And as we think about how we're going to live in this new world that we're coming to be aware of, this world of a changing climate, this world of climate refugees, this world of transition in ecosystems, it's not about stopping it anymore. Like that ship sailed long ago. We've been believing that it hadn't, but it has. The question now is, how are we going to live in this new world that's coming into being? What are the values that we're going to set? What are the boundaries that we're going to put in place? What are the expectations of governments and corporations that we're going to collectively establish about how we're going to live in this world? Because there's going to be millions upon millions of people that are going to need us to remember. To remember why, to remember that we are a human community. And it has to start with us remembering now. Not just for others, but also for ourselves. I was thinking through, why do we remember? Why do we remember? Sometimes we remember for comfort. We remember people that we've lost that gave us a sense of meaning, of purpose, that loved us, that helped us know that we are loved. Sometimes we remember in order to do. We need specific behaviors or activities. We have to remember, how exactly do you jump this car? Deposit. I'm going to go look it up on YouTube and make sure I don't electrocute myself. Right? And sometimes we remember to right size. We talked about this last week. Remembering, like reading Psalm 104, and the awe and the grandeur of reality helps to remind us to put ourselves in perspective. But I think more than anything, we're called to remember that we are part of God's creation, that we are part of one another, that every experience of connection we have with an individual is part of that remembering of feeling that we are part of this one organism, this one life together. Remember to be alive, to be connected, and to be created. So I implore you to consider, what do you need in order to continue to remember?